Hey Mary, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Nice to have you here. Mary, you're a plant scientist, a writer, and educator, and you work for the American Society of Plant Biology as a feature editor for the scientific journals The Plant Cell and Plant Physiology. So you aim at helping plant scientists to teach plant science and to create a worldwide inclusive and diversified plant community. So it's really interesting that you've started as I said, as a plant scientist, doing a PhD, working on a lab bench, and then switched to being an educator and now kind of a plant community manager or something like that. How did you decide to get towards education and empowering the community?
That's a great question. I think one of the factors was that I really didn't encounter the excitement of plant science when I was a student, and certainly as a younger student, I was always taught by people who were not excited about plants. And when I started to meet people who found plants interesting, I realized the potential. It's an amazing system, all of the different plants we study, and yet very few undergraduates or even earlier students get that excitement. So I ran around a lot trying to enthuse people about plant science and found it quite challenging. So I think that was kind of a challenge to me, is how do I convey what I understand about plant science to people who have an idea that it's a boring field. And I'm sure everyone who's ever taught an introductory biology class has met students who say, oh, plants are boring. I'm going to come to the class for the neuroscience, but then the plant part I'm going to skip because I already learned about photosynthesis in high school, right? And you get that over and over again. And photosynthesis is fascinating, but when you teach it in high school, it's boring and complicated and mysterious, and you don't get that excitement. So my goal has been to help people who love plant biology find the tricks that allow them to convey that more effectively, because I think the world needs more plant biologists.
So during your career, was there a point where you said you were doing your PhD and then you said, God, this is so exciting, and when did you start to think about, okay, let's try to get people more excited about that? Or was it in bachelor's?
I mean, I think that there were two, they're not plant science specific, but there were two moments in my career where I really got excited. And one, I started out interested in environmental science and thinking about toxins and looking at the San Francisco Bay, because I was living here, and the pollution and the fish and all. And when I learned that mercury is a pollutant because it irreversibly binds to a protein, like that was so exciting to me, because it was this mysterious thing. You could look at charts and see numbers and parts per billion, but to learn why it's poisonous really excited me. So that got me interested in chemistry. And then I really loved learning about Jacob-Monod and the lac operon and thinking, this is amazing. You know, the cell senses its environment and switches on different enzymes or switches off different enzymes. And I just thought that was the most exciting and beautiful thing. And that sort of led me down the road to studying transcription. And when I was a student, it was difficult to find a multicellular system to study transcription. I worked on yeasts as an undergraduate, which are great, but there's pretty much single cells. And I was interested in cell-specific transcription. So I could work on Drosophila, but that was not my cup of tea. And someone said to me, hey, have you thought about plants? But of course I hadn't thought about plants because, you know, I was a molecular biologist, biochemist. Nobody had ever talked to me about plants. And then someone said, well, they're a really good system because you can take a gene and put it into, at the time we worked with tobacco plants, and see if it's active or not. So my entry into plants was simply that they were a convenient organism that I could manipulate. But then I actually started to understand plants. I worked with Ian Sussex, who was a great plant developmental biologist. And that was my postdoc. When you work with someone like that, who, you know, really understands the fascination of plant biology and plant development, it's infectious.
Yeah, I completely feel the infection.
Yes, yes, the good kind of infection.
The good kind of infection, right? Though, yeah, I'd still say the single-cell organisms and single-cell plants are still interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But we're not here to talk about that. So, what are the main projects you're currently working on? What do you do as an assistant feature editor, for example?
Okay, so I think have probably 3 main projects.
Mm-hmm.
And the assistant features editor program we began 6 or so years ago, and we have 2 journals, Plant Cell and Plant Physiology. And at the time, the editor-in-chief of Plant Cell was Sepia Merchant, and she had an idea, which was, why don't we bring in some postdocs, for example, and give them an opportunity to develop their writing skills by writing little articles about articles that we're publishing. So a research article might be 10 or 12 pages, and the postdocs would write a 1-page summary. Mm-hmm. So we started this with both journals, and I'm in charge of Plant Physiology, the other journal. And it's a wonderful opportunity for people who want to develop their writing skills. I should mention that before I started working for the American Society of Plant Biologists, I spent 14 years at a small liberal arts college. Yep. And one of the courses I taught was scientific writing. And this is also something I learned from Ian Sussex, who really taught me how to write. He was well known as a writer, and I had written a grant proposal. And we sat down side by side, and I'd never had anyone teach me how to write like this. And he read the first sentence out loud, and then he turned to me and he said, "Does this say exactly what you want it to say in the best way possible?" And my mind was completely blown because, I'd handed off things to my PhD advisor and he'd scribbled on them and handed them back, but we never actually talked about it. And to sit down side by side with someone and go through sentence by sentence, word by word, paragraph by paragraph, and discuss writing, I suddenly understand that there is logic to writing. It's not this mysterious thing. There are rules and guidelines that allow you to be a good and effective writer. So I really love helping people learn to write because that made such a difference to me to have someone kind of coach me. So I love working with the assistant features editors, and they will send me a draft, and then I will comment on it. I don't just scribble things out, but I explain with comments, like this is why I think this would be maybe expressed differently, and we have a sort of virtual dialogue. And what I see is that they are learning and becoming much more proficient. And honestly, I think one of the most important skills any scientist can have is to be a good writer, because people judge us by our papers and our grants, and both of these are presented to the world in written format. Right? And if you can't write, and I'm sure many people have experienced this frustration of having ideas that they don't communicate well and getting comments back that someone misses the whole point of the paper or the grant. So anyway, that's one of my big projects, is working with the assistant features editors in helping them develop their writing. And we publish these in the journal. So they have DOIs, they count as a publication. So it's kind of a win-win situation.
And so you said, so that's one of your 3 main projects.
That's right.
And that's the one you're developing with the ASPB and Plant Physiology.
Yes. I have another project which is actually with the other journal, the Plant Cell, and this is how I actually moved from teaching to working with the journals, which is I was invited to develop a series of articles to support teachers, and this series is called Teaching Tools in Plant Biology. This was the idea originally of a different editor-in-chief, Kathy Martin, when she was editor-in-chief of Plant Cell. She said, wouldn't it be great if there was just a database somewhere, and she didn't really like teaching very much, so that when I have to teach a class, I could just grab the materials and go give a lecture, right? That was her idea, make my life easier. And of course, I'd been teaching for 14 years. I had all the ideas of how can you make gravitropism exciting, right? Oh, well, here's how we can do it. So I spent the first 7 or 8 years of my time with ASPB full-time writing and creating these teaching tools. We now have, I think, 45 or 46 on every topic from Python to imaging roots to things like steroid signaling. So more or less any topic someone wants to teach, there's some resources to help them. So that was my first project.
So if anybody wants to teach anything about plants, they should go on the Plant Cell website and get all the tools you've developed.
And some of the ones that I think are the most interesting are the ones that are really very broad. And one of the ones I really like is medicinal plants, right? And this is something you don't have to teach only to plant scientists, because medicinal plants touch on every aspect of everything. We also have one on plants, food, and human health that sort of talks about, carbohydrates and lipids and vitamins and all these things. And again, it's excellent for introducing plants into a different kind of course. So
And so that was the
first.
That was the first.
The second was the assistant features editors, and then the third project is my newest project.
The Root and Shoot.
The Root and Shoot, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. But
so what is it? Can you talk about?
Yes, I would love to talk about it, obviously. The National Science Foundation is, a major funding body in the United States. And they are able to kind of affect policy in small ways by choosing what kinds of projects to fund. So they recognize that there are cultural issues within sciences that filter differentially people based on their social identities. So some people set out for a career in science and it's difficult, but other people set out for a career in science and it's much more difficult. Not because of aptitude or skill, but because of how they're perceived by others, their family background, all these different factors. So the National Science Foundation would really like to see science demographically reflect the broader population, and they're out of sync right now. So they offered an opportunity for specifically professional societies, like the one I work for, to put in a proposal to use the power of a professional society, which includes publishing journals, hosting meetings, providing small grants to people, use that, and also just to kind of drive cultural change themselves. So the National Science Foundation funded this project that 7 plant science organizations are contributing to. So it's called a research coordination network, right? We've got the Maize Genetic Society, the Arabidopsis community, the American Phytopathological Society, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's called Root and Shoot. Well, for one thing, there's sort of a tradition with the National Science Foundation of naming projects through acronyms. So we were trying to come up with an acronym that reflected our identity as plant scientists, but also our goals. So Root and Shoot reflects our identity as plant scientists, but it means rooting out oppression together, root, and sharing our outcomes transparently, shoot. And that came to me in the middle of the night one night, and I love it. Very proud of that. But it's a fantastic program, and we are, I think one of the big powerful parts of it is that collectively these 7 organizations really span plant science. And we're working together to identify the barriers and obstacles. And then we're using the funding from the National Science Foundation to bring in experts and consultants and advisors. We have stipends to help early career scientists get into this project and help us to identify solutions to some of the projects.
So that's interesting. What are the main challenges that you're trying to tackle with that? Do you have few examples of recent things you've been trying to do with this?
Yes. So when we talk about diversity, we're really talking about sort of numbers. And I can show you that we have, for example, an underrepresentation of Black or Latina scientists compared to the demographic. And the question is, why is that? And the social scientists have done a lot of research, and they say it's because your culture is not very inclusive. You tend to prioritize behaviors and attitudes and histories that are favoring one group over another. So I'm sure you're familiar with these stories about microaggressions. This happens particularly to women of color, where they may be in a room full of people and someone will walk over to them and say, "Oh, we're out of coffee," sort of assuming that they are only there as a caterer rather than as a scientist. So there are many commonalities across all disciplines where you can see examples of these factors. We've been familiar with this certainly with women for a long time. For example, conferences didn't traditionally allow women to bring children, which can be a problem for a nursing mother. So there's a lot of well-known challenges. And part of the challenge is simply educating people about language. We still use language that is not inclusive. People use terminology that tokenizes people. And an example of that is when we use a metaphor about disability that's not specifically about disability. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, that's a lame idea," or double-blind peer review. Well, these have nothing to do with ability. These are just shorthand ways. So we're trying to encourage people to be thoughtful about the language they use, because, you know, if you're a person with a disability and you hear something that very powerfully affects you being trivialized in this way, it could be quite harmful. So we're talking to people who perceive themselves as sort of excluded, and identifying, you know, in what ways is this group, is their behavior, are they marginalizing you through their behavior, and how can we help this larger group change their behaviors so that you no longer feel unwelcome when you come into the community, because that is what the evidence shows. People say, "Oh, I want to be a scientist." They show up in the room full of scientists and they're immediately told, "You don't belong here," in various subtle and not so subtle ways. So it's a challenge, but there's a huge commitment from the people doing this work. Because we don't want to be an exclusive or hostile community.
Obviously, but I found the plant science community is a nice plant community, and might be easier to change than other communities that I've seen.
Yes, I agree. We are the best community. And part of that is because plant scientists are already marginalized in the sciences, right? And I know that some of the worst behaviors occur in, for example, medical sciences, where the stakes are higher, the grants are higher, the opportunities for patents are higher, so you have a lot more hostility. Whereas the plant biologists, we've always been sort of struggling to get funding and to get recognition. So I think we already have, we're a good way along understanding what it means to be facing these hostile cultural challenges.
Are you trying to implement, like in the way, for example, people talk, for example, have you tried to change it in the ASPB meeting, for example, or? So
this is our first big project, and we're very, very close to sharing it publicly. But we've been working for the past year on in guide to inclusive conferences that's shared amongst the plant science community, so that we can educate everyone at once. And some of the things we want to do are, we want to educate leaders in the societies who can lead by example. We also want to, and we'll be doing this later this summer, offering bystander training, so that if someone is at a conference and witnesses something that causes harm to someone, they feel empowered and they feel a sense of responsibility to actually step up and say, you know, "Are you okay?" And I hope you understand that the language you're using is offensive. And we also are planning to fund an external person who will work with all of our conferences, so that you know, because if you're my chair and you're doing something offensive, I'm not comfortable telling you that you're being offensive, because there's going to be repercussions. So having a person who's outside of our hierarchies is really critical in allowing us to have reporting schemes. So that's our first big push. We've worked very hard, and we're very close to being able to share it.
I'm sure when the video will be out.
Very good.
It will
Go to the
be-
website.
Yeah, we'll put a link to the website.
Fabulous.
Quickly, we're running out
I
of
know, I
time,
talk
but
too much, sorry.
it's fascinating. No, I mean, that's the goal. I'm wondering, has there been any recent actions led by other colleagues or another professional society or even the ASPB that you think is groundbreaking for the plant science community as a whole? It might actually be root and shoot.
Yeah, right. Well, certainly. I mean, I think I certainly entered science curious about basic science, and I think many people in our community, saw the world through a microscope lens and like the little details, like why does mercury poison cells? But I think increasingly we are recognizing that we can't just focus on the minutia, that we have to step back and look at the world around us, which is, maybe not irreparably broken, but quite broken. And we are seeing increasing problems with climate change. And so I think what I'm seeing happening is that everyone is taking on the responsibility of trying to understand, how can my science help us to answer these questions?
Mm-hmm.
I'm also seeing, and this is a huge challenge because every country has their own funders, but I'm starting to see more of an effort for wealthier countries like the United States to try and partner with countries that don't have the same resources but have significant challenges, like Bangladesh, which is, as the storms are increasing and the water levels are rising, their rice fields are being inundated with salt water, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for a resource-poor country to be able to feed themselves.
Yeah.
But we have fantastic science in the US and in Australia that can help them, right? And so we're seeing more international cooperation. And again, the recognition that that's not someone else's problem, it's everyone's problem.
Yes.
So
So
that's my
it's
hope.
more, you feel that the scientific communities and the funding communities is kind of gathering together worldwide across different countries. And so do you feel that in 5 or 10 years we'll have a unified plant community and unified governments that will fund cross-governmental projects in plant science?
I don't think that the governments are going to be the leaders. I think the plant scientists have to be the leaders. And I think if we can form multinational and multi-institutional organizations where people bring what they can, right? I'm kind of a socialist, right? Everyone gets what they need and everyone gives what they can. But I think that they're going to happen sort of outside of the governmental funding, because governments are very myopic and they have very internal looking priorities, which probably makes sense. If I were in government, I might feel
we
that
have
way.
to be the leaders.
We have to be the
eventually
leaders, exactly.
at creating the change.
I agree.
And gathering together as a community.
Yes.
There are plenty of stuff that we didn't have time to talk about, but thank you very much, Mary. It was really great.